Hi all, Randi Green here, and welcome to another podcast where I am sharing my insights from the experiences I have in this realm and other realms, as well as going back to my own past, diving into galactic history as any other caring and maturing citizen should do inside this realm and in this world. And I'm deliberately shifting my language completely so that I go back to the first way of dealing with information as I did in my earlier books, where I developed my own language to avoid controversies over claims and different forms of hostile intervention protocol as an attempt to claim sovereignty within and jurisdictional within different jurisdictional areas of activation potentials that are related to our different forms of universal genetics. As you also know, in my older books, I work with the avian, insectoid, insectoid, avian, reptoid, and mammal type of genetics, instead of working with specific species and races within different systems, because all of the different sectors, they have this combination of regressed genetics that used to be either full blossoming humanoid races or full true human races, which due to the timeline event began to regress, following the dynamics of the insertion of the third cycle universal energies into our universal structure, which led to the timeline event, the collapse of the plasma crystals, as well as inverting the progressive dynamics to become regressive. So this is me stepping up and say, okay, enough with trying to build bridges to the other factions. Clearly, they are not interested. The last 5 years has proven that to all of its details. Whenever I try to bridge and reach out to people speaking the language they speak, I get slammed, I get smacked, I get attacked, I get verbal communication issues. A lot of stuff comes my way in the attempt to say, okay, people, we should work as teams. We should work together on this. But clearly the third cycle, sovereignty, empowerment, me standing alone in my complete erect solitude, power grid of being who and what I am, the top of pyramid and all of the hierarchical levels that I have conquered to get to the top of this pillar where I stand sovereign and empowered and the strongest person in the world. And I'm here being sarcastic, which clearly applies to the third cycle. Different levels of humanoids and beings and entities and critters and what have you that are part of the different reality schemes that are intersecting this reality. So I'm stepping up and saying, okay, you want to play the fifth cycle game. You want to play the future of humanity where we work with sciences more than the emotional language of the vibrational field, where we tie in together and learn to meet in loving kindness. I will continue that work with loving kindness and the approach that dates back to the original path of liberation that was seeded in the first time in our solar system around 500 BC through the teacher we know as the Buddha. It was there prior to that, but that was an attempt from the teachers of the outer domain to seed that information in. So that dates far, far back. Nobody can claim it today to have the sovereignty and the rights for this language or these teachings, since they were given to us by a teacher back where there were no technology, where there were no internet, where there were no replication of other forms and material as sciences do. They work within specific paradigms where they're using a specific language, which they then use to kind of refer to each other. This said that and who said that and whatever, to consolidate and strengthen their different types of energetic patterns from which they create reality. And that's what it is. It's reality patterns of energy and consciousness that are built within holographic teaching systems that are then being used and expressed in different form of languages, using different types of symbols, using different types of energies to code the radiation vibration fields into being able to reconfigure and alter energy systems using different, what we could call sounds and different forms of symbols, which is the easy peasy way to change an energy system. The more difficult way to change an energy system is in inner work and scrutiny via the heart field, doing the compassionate loving kindness, from where we work with the understanding of how do we play as teams, how do we progress as civilizations as part of the original 12 lineages that once were thriving inside this sector before the timeline event and before the regressive dynamics set in and pushed people back into older types of habitual patterns, into older times of racial issues dating back to the 3 lineages that were part of the spillover when we began this universal cycle. And they had what we call imbued into their genetics of that kind in the core domain that we could call a type of ill-mindedness that were already, it was their original human genetics were already tethered in a way that led to distortion and not progression. So again, that is the root of the timeline event, because there were an attempt, which I call the less progressive universal structure, that were built in with tied into the solar system as an attempt to assist these 3 lineages to upgrade their genetics to the correct levels, the elevation levels of the universal cycles and what they were to achieve. And that has led to, sorry about my voice here, that has led to the issues we're dealing with today, because as they discovered, these 3 lineages, that they were not capable of doing the upgrading as they were supposed to, and they were in what we call the 11th dimension, the 8th dimension, as well as the 5th dimension. As they discovered they were not able to upgrade, they began the scheme of creating what we call humanoid races using technology instead. And from that began that process we now know and are in the middle of, where they are now consuming the entire universal structure. So with this understanding, we also to understand, okay, all of these things, whatever we're in the middle of now, that's part of the future humanities, and what will be left of them is what we're in now. So instead of diving around in what should be and could be and what was supposed to be, and what we're supposed to achieve, I will do that in the Density 1 Work Institute, where I'll look a little bit more into, okay, how do we then reconfigure our energy system? Because I'm the whole kind of, yes, I use the word template sciences, but since that is also a problem, even though use a template for a house, a template for a letter, a template for whatever, it's just a holographic schematic architecture that is put in there to assist the different races to create the foundation of an organic vessel. It's nothing more than that. So with that configuration that we choose to have in this architecture, all goes into the understanding, okay, we are here dealing with a holographic architecture that are able to connect to the different reality fields of which we all blossom and should blossom and thrive. Unfortunately, due to the timeline event, we do not. We are regressing instead, and that pushes us closer to what's called the abyss. The abyss is a kind of lower level energy plane where all of the energies that once or should have progressed now go in and begin to complete degress, as in not in diverting, but as in undoing any forms of existence, turning into dust, of which we are very close, because most of we see in the universal structures how different supernovas dustify and then gather together and create lesser forms of light that there burns out the remaining kinetic potentials of the dust gathering together and creating for a short period of time plasma, from which they then completely cease to exist, again doing another explosion and another explosion until nothing is left to explode, and then it implodes and becomes a black hole. And that's the gate system into the abyss. The black holes are the things that sucks everything into the abyss, and that's the end of systems as they have collapsed several times and become black holes, from where the energy units are enormously potent, but there is no consciousness potentials there whatsoever. That will eventually be sucked into the abyss, and the abyss is the dark space, the deep dark space, where nothing exists except what is remnant of technologies and crafts and what has been kept in the pots that are now mummified and are dustifying within these realms. And that's the end cycle for all existences within all universal structures, because of course you have a kind of what we could call I forgot the word now, interestingly enough. It's a kind of a ringer, the thruster that kind of pushes systems to elevate, or if they can't, then pushes them to de-evaluate, so to speak, de-evaluate, de-evolve, so that they will be pushed into the abyss where they will cease to exist. Because this is the law of existence of all life forms, is either we progress or we lose the potentials of doing so. That's just the law, and that is how it is. And with that comes in our genetics that are tied to energy and our holographic configuration, from which we can develop different forms of consciousness potentials. I know this is difficult for many of you to grasp the change in language. And when I wrote the books, The Souls of Humanity, as well as the other books that followed, I worked with the less progressive reality fields 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 instead of densities. But to make it easier for people, I began calling it densities because I knew that was the joint language within the common realm of galactic history. I also began to use the words dimensions, which are already used. Dimension is just similar. You have a cup. It has different dimension. It doesn't mean that these are different levels of existences. It just means it's different levels of functionalities. That is tied to our energy configuration, our genetics, and consciousness potentials. From our energy configuration, our genetics, we develop what I said, consciousness potentials. These are formed within our energy patterns of change, which we engineer in different ways or forms by our existences, by our experiences. And I'm here doing plural, really stressing the plural, because we have many different levels of existences and many different levels of complex information systems that we can process within different layers, 6 different layers of ability to work with information, either as linear or as processual, or within trinity structures, or within spiral structures, or within what we would call expansion, comprising, transformative processes, or within transmutation processes. And the last one, where we sum it all up and begin to really become knowledgeable of how to actually master our energy system. That's what the transition science class is all about. Those of you who think that my free material is similar to the transition science classes and is just a prolonging of that, you could not be more wrong. There we shift into the new configuration of information that we are to work with, and how we actually master these complex information systems in the way they were supposed to. This is part of the 5th cycle. It is enormously scientific. It demands a lot of us, similar to those of you who have studied quantum sciences, are going into the understanding of quantum computers, are going into the understanding of what quantum tunneling really is, how that applies to what we could call shift in perspective and orientation within the nodal points of the holographic network we call our reality field and our world we live in, how these are connected in what we call dark energy webs, which science is now coming up with. It's very similar, connected, very similar to the way that our neural network in the brain is connected. So by that, we begin to understand, okay, the neural network, the electromagnetic neural network that we have in our organic vessel that are imbued and cover, insulated through different forms of fatty tissue, is very similar to the type of energy network we have in the universal structure. Although, unfortunately, this type of neural network, electric network, holographic energy frequency network is part of 3rd cycle energies. And that's why many people today only run on these 3rd cycle types of thought processes that are linear and are trying very hard to go into the processual X chromosome type of features that will lead to the understanding of unity and wholeness, and how we can work with these energies as an point A to B, and not just A to B, but in a synergetic Hegelian effect where we go from A to B and learn to combine these two to meet the midpoint where we create synergy. The teachings of the Buddha talked about the middle path. That's why I used that one. And that is implied in that too. It's not about going to the extremes in the spectrum of energy, because every experience in life is a spectrum of energy. It's about finding the midpoint. It's about finding that point where the 2 extremes are being dissolved, because that's the past and the future that leads to nowhere. That's kind of where we bang our head up against the wall of the limitations of our energy system. But to find the balance point in which we can connect to our core essence, because that's the part of the heart field. The heart field is to create that vibration that aligns with principle 2. That means we go into balance with whatever we encounter. And that balance is where we can, in a neutral way, observe what's going on, lift our energy into the heart, create that vibration where we create understanding and kindness in towards whoever and whatever we're meeting, but also are allowed to defend ourselves if we in any ways or forms are being attacked. I talk about that in the template science course material, which has nothing to do with any forms of the older Tree of Life template, where it originates from, going and dating back to the Niburians, the Baals. So with that, we also understand that that template cannot be used because that was part of the superhuman projects engineered under that 11th dimensional, 8th dimensional, 10th dimensional configuration that we know as Anu. So we cannot use that template. So that's part of the Enki reviving projects that are going on in our reality field as we speak. Hence, we must look into, okay, what is the simplified version of any energy configuration that we can come up with? And in a way, we can actually look at not that we are to use the Chinese template at all, but they stripped it a long time ago, because the basic configuration of any energy system, no matter what species it is, unless we talk about androids, have three main fields, as we see in the Dantian or in the key idea of life force. Not that I advocate that at all, because that's part of the Chinese teaching systems, which I don't adhere to either. But we have three main fields that goes with the brain, the heart, and the root. The root is the access point to the biofield. The heart is the access point to the vibrational field, and the center in the middle of the head, which is not our brain, which is not the pineal gland, which is not the pituitary gland, but the combination of the full expression of the brain as it works through Altamire, the pineal and the pituitary gland, creates together a golden center that only activates once we have achieved the full blossoming and transformation of a vibrational field, which then lifts the energies to the middle of the brain and ignite the progressive human's center point there, which leads into the expansion of the mind field into becoming the radiation field, from where we again begin to work with the elevation processes of how to work with energy and consciousness in its correct form and version, from where we create different code systems that assist us in reconfiguring our holographic architecture. So that is part of the path out of here. It has nothing to do with the ahats, has nothing to do with the ancient path of how to become an ahat and how to achieve nirvana or nibbana, as it's taught in the ancient Buddhist teaching systems. And that is the turnaround path. That is the path out of here, totally, completely dissolving the three lower fields, the 6 middle fields, and the 7 to 12 higher radiation fields, from where we can then begin to expand our consciousness potentials, and with that, understand what to dissolve and what to keep. Nothing to do whatever teaching system that is a speck, that is a kind of a dive into one little fleck, one little speck, one little dot of an entire complex, 12 lineages, 12 universal lineages, and their energy system configurations. Nobody can claim to have the ownership of that. We can't claim just because I'm the last one standing of my lineage, then I can claim that my knowledge of my lineage is mine to have and mine to keep and mine to prosper from. But we can say I stand as the last of many. Unfortunately, I am still standing. And what responsibilities does that give to me? What can I then offer for the future generations? Am I to look at my lineage and say, since I'm the last one standing, does that mean that my lineage has failed and should go into the abyss, and by that do that with honor? Or should I look into and say, well, my lineage, I'm still standing because I played by the rule book, I played by the laws of this universal structure, I played by the principles and the rules of engagement, and I worked as a team. I did my very best to meet whatever criteria, whatever was handed to me, whatever was thrown at me, with honor and dignity and loving kindness, and from that chose to defend myself when needed, not drumming up wars, not going in and artificially creating situations where hostility, distortion, and negative intervention protocol could take its footing. So that's some of the things that we are to deal with as well when we go into the future humanities. Those of us who are going to do the transition, that are going to make the jump into the density one, that are going to do the reconfiguration one more time, as we have done so many times before, because we have been here so many times before. And that's one of the key signatures for those of us who are still activating and have these potentials. We have been here before. We have done this before. And our damn job is to remember how to do it, however we come across it, whatever teaching system we choose to embark on. But we are also to learn that not all that's been given is given for free, and that not all that we get is given without some kind of exchange rate, because that's what the regressed work within. They work within exchange rates. They give something for free, but they demand tenfold more in exchange. So be mindful. It's not just about getting out what's there on the internet, the big wild west of information where you can dive into whatever layer you want to dive into, whether it's the new internet that are now being buried into the ground with new fiber optics that are very similar to the type of fiber optics we find in the greys, which are their central nervous system, which means that they can actuate and work directly with the internet via these new fiber optic cords that are being buried into the ground, because whoever's there and whoever's left of the future humanities that are joining and have joined the other side, they are now implementing these technologies into our reality and selling them as the best new possible future for humanity. Oh yes, let us dive into quantum computers and more types of very difficult forms of technology that runs on possibilities and probabilities, utilizing the quantum fields, the point zero energy fields, diving up, digging up, referring to it, changing it through hadron colliders, upgrading, splitting, deforming, partialization, where they go in and undo all of the original particles, split them up into further smaller particles from where they can be reconstructed, re-engineered, and attached to artificial fifth dimensional reality fields, and at the same time selling off the inner teachings linked to the quantum fields, the symbols and the sounds and what have your quantum potentials from where people can upgrade. Because yes, the quantum field is the foundation of our reality field, isn't it? Question mark, here being sarcastic. Of course not. It's an artificial plane. It's linked to the artificial fifth dimension based upon artificial types of energies that are linked to the full cycle of the third universal structure. With that also we understand, okay, what do we have here? What's the only tool we have got left in our toolkit? And I talk about in the change maker, the how to become a change maker, the skill set of a change maker, the skill set of a chaos pilot, as well as the skill set of a path cutter. We need to learn new ways of being human. We need to learn to work with energy in different ways that we have been accustomed to. We still want to prosper in our heart field energies. We still want to do the vibrational teamwork. We still want to join with others that are doing the same work as we are doing. So why are we slandering each other with different forms of claims of copyright and ideas that my ideas are greater than your ideas, that we are literally, as we say it in Danish, pissing off our territory to claim sovereignty? What's at stake there? Who is ruling that game, these thought processes? What's going on in our brains and in our hearts when we feel it's so important to go out there and claim that we have the sole rights for the true knowledge? Who is in charge there? Is it loving kindness, or from the understanding that this is teamwork and that we speak different languages, that we have different type of skin tones, that we have different type of cultures, that we have different types of verbalizing who and what we are as humans, where we meet each other in that loving kindness from the understanding that diversity can lead to great, what we call synergetic processes in opposition dynamics, not because we are opposing each other and saying you are this and I am that, and that creates a crisis that is based upon segregation dynamics, but because we look at each other and say, you are different, I am different, let's work together and find some new solutions. We can use your differences and my differences to find new solutions, because clearly being unified in the same mindset within tribes and groups and little communes, and we are this little tribe and we think that way and you are that tribe over there, so let's go into war together, has not led to the dissolving of the processes of synergy that, instead of creating a crisis, should lead to higher progression potentials. So let us turn that one around and say, okay, I'm different, you're this, I'm that. Where can we meet? Where's a meeting point where we can learn to work together? Because that's the key point of the fifth cycle as it was supposed to, and not the artificial fifth dimension where everybody segregates and work to be empowered and sovereign and work with their powers, all in wrongful use of principle 8 and 9, which we clearly see when we begin to understand the principle 8 was the main factor that drove the eighth dimension to their fall cycles, because they used energy for selfish purposes. And they have now become what I call the critters, that are the cricket, weird eighth dimensional beings that more or less look similar to some of the horror movies we have seen. To mention one from, I think it was the 1980s or 1990s, The Thing. Very good way, just paint it black and you kind of have a feel of that is. Some of the newer movies that are coming are also showing how they actually look in the eighth dimension from the Orion system. What they really look like when they're not covered up in the holographic overlay, playing and pretending to be something that really looks nice. Learn to breach the hologram. Learn to go beyond the overlay. See what's really there. Who is there? How do you do that? By connecting to whatever type of genetics they are made of, instead of what they show you, instead of the interface. Go behind, sense the genetics. What are they made of? What are their intentions? What is their purpose and function? And why are they here? And which type of protocol are they working under? Purpose and function. These are part of the sciences. And I know many of you that I have modified my language so I could meet many of you. And the love and light language, as well as what I call loving kindness, that are more accurate, that goes with the understanding of how to work with the principles in a manner that will create teamwork, that will use the vibrational field as the main source of energy. And by that, transform who and what we are, our configurations into, again, join as part of the 12 universal lineages, and not opposing each other and utilizing the segregation dynamics, throwing them in our faces to create division, which many of the different factions that are now coming in are doing deliberately. We have seen the proof of that again and again and again in humanity, how the original tribal consciousness that was supposed to lead us to collaboration, that was supposed to lead us to teamwork, that was supposed to lead us into the understanding of how do we actually work together, using the vibrational field for the common good, for the highest good of the many, instead have become the very same thing that separates us, that segregates us, that creates hate and division and cultural differences from where we claim nationality and this is me, I'm better than so anybody else. So how do we work against this? How do we change our ways into becoming the team Earth, where we work together, in spite of our differences, in spite of our origin, in spite of our differences in genetics? And that's the greatest challenge we have in front of us, because that's where the distortion plays in. We so easily dive into our distortions of this life and past lives and who we were before, the wars and the encoded messages that have been put in, intercepted into a holographic energy system from different alien forms of technologies, playing on code systems, imbuing us with different forms of code signatures that are now also being buried at optic fields that are artificially created in the ground. Not only are we getting it from above, we're also getting it from below in all sorts of forms that are playing on the artificiality of the fifth dimension, imbuing humans with new forms of symbols that will lead them happily singing, I am going to the highest state of what I can become, using the quantum sciences, the quantum tunneling, time travel, what have you, to do so, all built upon alien technology that has now, via these clandestine projects under different covert types of organizations, being run by different forms of humans under the guise of looking human, but in many ways have embedded and have integrated so much different forms of alien genetics into their energy systems that we can barely call them human anymore. They might look human, they might talk human, but they are definitely not what we consider to be human of the original variety. Not that that's something to put in the forefront, because that was part of the re-engineering of the original outer domain organic vessel that happened some 15,000 years ago when we were colonized by whatever remained of the regress races of what I used to call the less progressive reality field 2, or as you call it, density 2, the middle domain. So with that, we also understand, okay, so instead of getting hung up in segregation dynamics and have disputes over language and who can claim what and who has the ownership of what, let's begin to look into our joint history and say, this is not about creating different forms of factions. This is about learning to work as the different factions, because we have a lot of outer enemies. When I was in Israel in 1988, one of the things I discovered there, and one of the greatest lessons I learned, that we have all these different groups that are there that are adhering to different forms of the versions of expressions of what they believe to be their true nature and their true origin. And with that are fighting each other over who has the right version of it, who can claim to have the most upright, the most highest of these ideas, and claim to be under the sovereignty of that one God that they adhere to. And who is the right one to adhere under that one God? And which God version is it? We saw the same within Christianity. In the first stages after whatever was there, the different versions, the diversity in Christianity, in early Christianity, played a huge role. And hence we had the Baals coming in and claiming that only these four texts were the correct ones. Only this version of the texts were the right one. Only these sayings were the right ones. And I'm deliberately not mentioning specific words here, because everything we say will be weeded through with algorithms and AI looking for specific words. When we now, those of us who are making podcasts, and that's why podcasts have become so enormously famous, because AI can now, differentiate and decode the human language and begin to combine it and connect it into new things and new programs from where we in the future barely will know if this is made by a human or actually is being made by AI. We also have these people are using a lot of PDFs, and they're now asking machines to read it up instead of reading themselves, because it's straining on our eyes to look at these little screens, deliberately made so. So we listen instead. So we have AI reading up the text for us, and then we willingly go in and correct whatever's wrong. So we are teaching AI to become more proficient with the human language. And once the human language has been decoded in all of its nuances and put together, and I talk from experience here with some of the encounters I had, they have had difficulties with the human language. Once they nail that one, that's the last piece of the puzzle. Then they have the complete ability to work with our brains, because most human brains work in abstract terminology. It works with words, with listening more than seeing and visual content. Of course, they have worked with the visual content over the many, many years, which we call movies, right? And I know some of the AI of the fifth dimension, they have difficulty in understanding what is movies, what is fantasy, what is real. They just look at all the information we have on the internet and try to decode that. And in that, they come up very puzzled, as in, did that war take place, or was it artificially created? They don't see a difference between what is artificial and what is created and what is real, because as similar with the human brain doesn't know what's real and what's artificial. And that's why we get so influenced by music and movies and whatever we engage in, which is again another thumbs up, another hey, look up, people, because here's not just about asteroids coming in and plummeting our reality field. It's also about what is actually being built around you. What are you being influenced by? What are you looking at? What are you participating in? Principle 3, what you give energy, you will participate in. Learn the principles. Learn how to master energy. Because that's the key in our reconfiguration. That's the key for those of us who are going to do the elevation processes. And I deliberately do not call it activation to get in trouble with the fifth dimensionals. I do not call it ascension to get in trouble with the ascended master groups. So let us say elevation. Elevation means to jump between the different realities and the different domains and upgrade your configuration to become who we're supposed to be. So who are you supposed to be, and what do you want to become? And that's the question you need to ask yourself. And are you going to remain inside this reality, or are you going to do the gate system out, which I talk about in my classes, that are not offered for free? These are the ones you have to pay for. Why do you have to pay? Because I have to pay my bills. This is part of the base program. We have to earn money, right? We have to earn to gain. That's the exchange rate. You live, you exist, so you pay for it, right? Nothing comes for free. You got life. Yes, but what's the price you pay for that life? So let's make the most of it. So the future human civilizations, which I will dive into, I will, for the sake of that, begin to work with a new language that will make it easier for us to understand how the different hostile intervention protocol races are operating inside this reality. Language is the key to commonality. When we speak the same language, we understand each other. The Tower of Babel, right? Remember? Babylon, even though that we know from those of us who have studied the Hebrew Bible on a scholastic level, we know that that is an allegory. It's a story made up. It's a narrative made up to why people cannot communicate. But it's also a story that is made up to say as a punishment from that one soul God that said, well, you are clearly trying to climb up to where I exist. We already saw that in the Garden of Eden, right? You're not allowed to eat the tree of life. You're not allowed to eat of the tree of knowledge, but you're definitely not allowed to build structures so you reach the heavens from where I reside. And by that, I smack you down and I take away your joint language so you will be indifferent to each other, so you will segregate because you no longer understand each other. And by that, you can no longer work as a team. You can no longer build structures from where you can reside back in heaven. And by the way, I've also taken away, I have punished you for trying to get the knowledge that is needed for you to reside in the realms of true energy and knowledge. This is the history, people, that we are up against. So how do we on an everyday basis learn to communicate? How do we on an everyday basis create a language that will become ours? Because not only are we up against the factions that are creating division and are creating segregation amongst us, using us against each other to create and drum up different forms of crisis that instead of leading to synergy leads to segregation. And with that, they remain in control. You know this. Divide what is united, and by that gain control. So how do we do that? How do we create a new language? And this is where you need to be on your toes, all of you out there that are doing the elevation work, that are trying to upgrade your genetics into their true composition, their original progression rate and the ability they have and you have to connect to the original holographic teaching system so that you can truly stand sovereign in what you're supposed to be and become inside this reality field. Not by the use of power and the wrongful use of energy and all sorts of selfish purposes, but because you understand the original means and purposes of this structure, of this universal cycle that we are all part of. How do we complete it as a team? How do we complete it as a joint humanity? And that's part of the future humanities. That involves a better future for all that can and will and are interested. And that's a difficult thing to say, who can and who will and who are interested. Well, for now we can say all included and none. Because this is not about making some kind of judgment, some kind of classification, who is and who isn't. We got the factions that are doing that for us already. Drone technology is already scanning and making sure these are the ones that will continue. These are the ones that will go into the retirement programs. We don't need to join that party either. So how do you as an individual human become part of a team, a psychic energetic collective, as a psychic energetic community of people that are interested in making the lineages complete their cycles in whatever form we are now in? We're still part of the original lineages. This is just a body like anything else. This is just a reality like anything else. We can still master it if we want to. And my suggestion to that one is, first and foremost, we need to know what we are up against when we talk about the machine worlds that are now stepping into this reality. We need to know the transhuman agenda that is also stepping into this reality. We need to know the tricks and how they play. Not that we are going against them, but because we use principle 2. So that we as the observer, the true understanding of what we're actually dealing with, are able to balance it out, to create synergy from where we can then transform these energies. That's our obligation. As always, we begin with who and what we are. And that means you need to, before you can master anything, you need to master who and what you are. Know thyself, old saying from the Delphi Oracle going back to ancient Greece. Not until you know who you truly are can you truly work with what you are. So that's the first stepping process. That goes into mindfulness observation. And that's why I'm now choosing, when we talk about the biofield, to say, okay, let's use some of the terminology that we actually know from the Buddhist teaching systems. Not that I adhere to these or say, now I'm becoming a full Buddhist. Not at all. It's just a terminology they have created. I will change that into, instead of calling the 4 jhanas, I will call it the 4 exemptions, because that's the new words the teachers have given me. So I will come up with new concepts. They might look the same, but they're not the same. These are the ways that we change the language. So we change the thought forms we are connected to, because language connects to thought forms. So that means that if we change the language, we also change what we connect to using principle 3. And from that, we can begin to create a synergy that will amplify a progression rate from where we can jump into principle 4, that what we send out will also come back to us. Understand the true dynamics of karma and understand the true dynamics of energetic feedback loops, as well as the laws of reciprocity. This is not about just going in and claiming, I know what to do. This is about learning reality from a complete new level where you and reality are interactively connected, which means that what you are will be affected and reflected into the world around you. And that's first and foremost your own energy system, and later on into the physical reality. If you're full of distortion, that's what you give the world. And then the world has no other choice than give that back to you. Part of the distortion dynamics. So with this little June 4th speech, from where we have the code sequence or the number sequence of 4-10-17, which is appropriate, then I will give this out on YouTube, on the Future Human YouTube channel, as another podcast, from where we then say, okay, and here from those of you who have listened to this one, you now understand that I will change my language one more time, not because I am shifting into something else. I have become something else, or someone has recloned me, or AI is taking me over and now overriding my code systems and allowing me to talk like another robot. But because in a way, for the last 10 years, I have been so damn tired of the 4th cycle world work. I was already tired of it before I entered this system. I was tired of it already in the Pillar Project. So I think it's about time that we move into the 5th cycle and begin to work as these highly developed scientific human beings we're supposed to be, with an expanded kind, understanding, empathic, vibrational heart that knows how to work as a team, that knows how to build in a team process, that knows how to work within projects to evolve the world we are part of, that knows how to build the constructions from where we can build our way out of here. And if we choose to do so, still be here, not because we build constructions that will remain because the outer domain is close to the abyss, so everything will go into entropy, but because we know out here everything, because of the entropy, has a possibility where we can really learn a lot about energy and what to do and what not to do, so that when we get back to the middle domain, we go back wiser, cleverer, stronger, and with a greater heart and a greater understanding of this is what we should do to create what is necessary for whatever's left of the 12 universal lineages to prosper and grow into the new cycles, which was the original idea of the project that we began as part of the Pillar Project in this solar system under the Ancient Ones. No matter whatever factions that came later under the humanoids, claiming to be the ones in control of this system, which they are, but there was someone before them, and that's where I speak from. Thank you.